Racism became a very prominent issue in America throughout the mid-1900s. Though the time of slavery had ended almost a century prior, equality was still not granted to African Americans by the Caucasian race. America was in the practice of separate but equal, also known as segregation. African Americans were granted the same rights as whites, however, they could only practice those rights within their race. In schools, classrooms, water fountains, and restrooms were separate. If they wished to eat in white restaurants, they had to go through the back door and were only allowed to sit in the back of public transit, like the bus. Violence was cast and racial slurs were thrown to any black person who tried to challenge those boundaries. Coming into the mid-1950s, African Americans had decided that they wanted full equality and that separate but equal had to stop. This was the mark of the beginning of what became known as the Civil Rights Movement.
The Civil Rights Movement emerged as the most important force for social change in post-war America. One of the most known movements would have to be the Brown versus Board of Education case. Started by Mr. Brown, whose daughter Linda Brown had to walk 6 blocks to get to a bus that would take her to her school that was a mile away, while another school that was only whites was just 7 blocks away from their home. This was a case that was taken to the Supreme Court for wanting equal rights for black school children. This case challenged the separate but equal rules that started in the Plessy versus Ferguson case, which laid out the rights for blacks and whites to have the same facilities, but blacks had to be separated. There have been many cases to fight for this change because blacks felt that education was the most important function of the state and that their children should get the same treatment whites get. The segregation in school was denying the equal protection of laws and the rights for blacks. Mr. Brown won this case and became a victory for blacks, but also the start of many fights for justice in the black community.
Joan Robinson was a leader of the Montgomery bus boycott, which took place in 1955 through 1956. Joan Robinson was born in 1912 and died in 1992. She was a professor at Alabama State College. Joan Robinson was a big part of the Montgomery bus boycott. She was the main person to get the Montgomery bus boycott up and running. Joan Robinson wrote a notice and had it sent to all the black people in the area. She used good persuasive writing to get all African Americans to stop riding the bus on the day of Rosa Parks' trial. She appealed to her fellow African Americans by showing how society has arrested another fellow African American for no real reason. This would be the first thing to get the Montgomery bus boycott up and running. Thanks to Joan Robinson getting the word out to the African Americans in Montgomery, nobody rode the bus on the day of Rosa Parks' trial. This would lead to a worldwide spread of the bus boycott.
Martin Luther King Jr. was a clergyman, an innovative speaker, and prominent leader in the African American civil rights movement. On December 5th of 1955, the first day of the Montgomery bus boycott, thousands of Montgomery citizens gathered at Holt Street Baptist Church for the first mass meeting of the Montgomery Improvement Association, where King delivered his first address as the MIA president. Martin Luther took on a nonviolent approach to the racial issues of America. He believed in talking reason to get his point across. In his speech, he addresses the national problem of racism and segregation, more directly the issues surrounding the Montgomery, Alabama community bus boycott and the Rosa Parks trial. There comes a time when people get tired of being trampled over by the iron feet of oppression. King spoke of the rights written in our Constitution. He claimed that there will be nobody among us who will stand up and defy the Constitution of this nation. And that is what's going to take the determination and strength of the black community to fight against such injustices and acquire their rights. Martin Luther used his words to enlighten a fire in the black community to fight back in a civilized way. When the history books are written in the future, somebody will have to say there lived a race of people, of black people, fleecy locks and black complexion, of people who had the moral courage to stand up for their rights and thereby be injected a new meaning into the veins of history and civilization.
Some felt that the ruling of the Brown versus Board of Education case was unjust and wrong. A group of congressmen gathered together to write the Southern Manifesto, also known as the Southern Declaration on Integration. They felt the decision for blacks and whites to share a classroom was a clear abuse of judicial power. Their argument was that due to the original Constitution and the 14th Amendment not stating anything about education, that it was wrong for the Supreme Court to pass this case. Using the case of Plessy versus Ferguson with separate but equal and how that was for transportation and nothing past it. The Roberts versus City of Boston case was what started the separate but equal schools fight, and it took place in the North and not the South. These congressmen felt that because it didn't take place in the South, that they didn't have to partake in this, and that the parents should be able to direct the education of their own children. In the Southern Manifesto, they stated that due to these unwarranted changes, that the relationship that took 90 years to build between whites and blacks has now turned from friendship to hatred. The congressmen said that they wanted to fix these wrongs with the Southern Manifesto, but it only made matters worse.
Unlike Martin Luther King, Malcolm X was willing to do whatever it took for African Americans to achieve justice. Malcolm became a Muslim when he was in prison. After he got out, Malcolm became the national spokesman for the Nation of Islam. Malcolm was very intelligent when it came to getting his point across. He utilized newspaper columns as well as radio and television to communicate his message across the United States. Malcolm believed all whites were racist and America would never respect African Americans. In Malcolm's Black Revolution speech, he stated, "I am not against using violence in self-defense. I don't even call it violence when it's self-defense, I call it intelligence." This led up to Black separatism movement, which divided whites from African American institutions. However, the Black nationalism was designed to gain control over the United States. On February 21, 1965, Malcolm X was shot 15 times in close range, causing uproar in the Black community and chaos throughout the country.